Hi, I'm Victor Gijsbers, and this is the fourth episode of my interactive fiction analyses. I'm going to try something a little bit different this time, a little bit more informal. I've written down some notes, I will be looking at those notes. I'm just going to make one continuous recording that doesn't need as much editing as some of the things I did previously. And I do this to keep down the amount of time it takes me to record this, and I hope that the end result will be equally enjoyable for you. And if so, I'll be able to record more of them in the same time span, obviously. So the piece that I want to talk about today is called We Know the Devil. It's a visual novel published in 2015 and created by a team, the main people in which were Aevee and Maya Schwartz. So it's a visual novel. That means that it's mostly based on text, but there are images which are very important for the mood. There's a very nice, spooky, unsettling synth soundtrack. There are some pictures taken in abandoned buildings in the woods. All of them build more atmosphere. But it's the prose, it's the words, and the ways that you choose between the different passages that you will get to read that really form the central structure of the game. And they are basically what I'll be talking about. So We Are the Devil is about three queer teenagers who have been sent to a summer camp. It's a supposedly Christian summer camp of an unspecified but rather unpleasant denomination, the aim of which seems to be that bad children go there and are taught to fight the devil. Given that we are talking about queer teenagers, I think we are squarely within a kind of a magical realist or symbolist expression of conversion therapy. People telling you that, you should change yourself, that you're being sinful, that your very being is sinful. That's sort of the general atmosphere here. Even though the specific religious tenets are not really center stage. That's not really what the game is about. What I will be doing in this video, as in all of my videos, by the way, is I'm going to analyze the game. And at this particular time, I'm going to first say something about the structure of the game, especially about its use of multiple endings, and why I wasn't blown away by that. In fact, why I think it's somewhat problematic. And then more positively, I'm going to talk about the thematic content, how it works, what is great about it, why I think it's powerful. It's an analysis, not a review, so it's going to be completely full of spoilers, and if you want to play this piece spoiler-free, then you should stop this video right now and play it before you return. It's evidently worth playing, or I wouldn't be making a video about it. It's not very expensive. It's a pretty good idea to check it out if that's the kind of information that you're after. But from this point onwards, I'm going to be analyzing it and assuming that you have a basic familiarity or are willing to listen to a game, even though you don't have basic familiarity with it. Alright, so let's start by talking about the structure of the game, and as I said, especially the fact that it has these multiple endings. And before I want to go specifically into the role of multiple endings in We Know the Devil, I would like to say something about, why games have multiple endings at all. What do you mean, why would you make a game and then create content that you're not going to see on every playthrough? Different endpoints, different ways for the story to end. I mean, it's not necessary, right? I mean, as a writer of a story, you might have a firm idea of how the story should end, and different endings could be kind of weird. I mean, nobody wants a Hamlet where it's also possible for Hamlet to, just get on with killing his uncle, and then marries Ophelia and everybody is happy. That's not Hamlet, right? So we want some rationale, I would say. We want to think about why multiple endings could work in a game, why it's good to have them. Now, Definitely one way in which multiple endings are used in games is to, especially in longer games, I would say, where this can be quite successful, is to create this feeling that the stuff you did, the choices you made during the game, had some real effect. So if I'm thinking about a game like, let's say, The Witcher 3, it's one of these gigantic role-playing games, and at certain points during the game you're going to favor one person over another, one faction over another, make one hard decision or another, and at the end of the game it gives you a sort of overview of the state of the world where your main decisions are reflected in what's going on. That's fine. It does give you maybe more of a sense that what you did, what you chose, actually mattered to some extent to this fictional world that you spent so much time in, to these fictional people that you interacted so much with. Another way to use multiple endings is as a gauge of skill, right? I mean, you could have a losing ending and a winning ending, or even an entire series of endings based on how well the player has managed to overcome certain obstacles, right? And here the different endings are rewards, really. You get these rewards for being good, for being even better, right? There are lots of video games which have a losing ending, you die, and maybe a winning ending, and maybe a super winning ending if you manage to, I don't know, fulfill some kind of weird achievement or something like that. And so the endings, like the fiction, is there mostly to reward player skill. I mean, this would be useful in games where skillfulness is front and center in the player experience, right? And it might be less useful in a game that's more about experiencing a narrative and making choices in a narrative. In other cases, having multiple endings is purely there as wish fulfillment, right? If I have this kind of dating sim where there are 7 girls or boys or whatever that I can date, and there are 7 endings, one where I end up with, one in whatever, you know what I mean. That is sort of catering to me, the player, as a kind of consumer who looks at this buffet of choices and goes like, ooh, I want the blonde with the big, and then giving me that, right? And I'm making it extremely banal in the way that I set up this example, but it's kind of banal, right? It's kind of banal to set out this buffet of options and say to the player, tell the player that, what do you want today? You're going to get it, right? I mean, as if an author of fiction is there to fulfill your desires, rather than maybe challenge your desires or problematize your desires or create entirely new desires that you didn't even know you should desire. So that's wish fulfillment. Then there's something that you hear a lot when people talk about multiple endings, is they say, well, it gives a game replayability, because you can now play the game again and get some other ending. And it doesn't really make any sense, right? Either the game is sort of replayable in itself, because there's a lot of content that you maybe hadn't discovered, or it's about, engaging with some fun game mechanic that you can't get enough of, or it's just replayable in the sense that a book is rereadable, right? That after 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years, you're like, ooh, I really want to experience this story again, and you read it again, but having some minor variation at the end is not going to suddenly magically transform this game into something that I want to experience once more. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, and I'll come back to this in a moment. And finally, maybe the worst reason to have multiple endings is to cater to the need of completionists, right? Where all these endings are like a series of achievements, and you are banking on this feeling that people have that they need to get it all, right? And who of us is totally immune from that feeling? I'm not totally immune from that feeling. And you're sort of trapping players into this maybe really unrewarding cycle of playing again and again and again, just in order to get this meaningless set of Steam achievements or whatever, and okay, not really worth discussing maybe. So that's sort of, I think, maybe I'm forgetting some, but I think those are sort of the main ideas that are on the table in general when people think about multiple endings and why games would have multiple endings. Except maybe one more, which is that multiple endings could be used to explore the thematic content of the game. And that is maybe the most interesting way of using multiple endings, though not necessarily the easiest to pull off. And I think it's the category where we would have to put We Know the Devil. Right, so We Know the Devil is interested in the question of how three-person relation dynamics work out. Right, if you put three people together in the kinds of circumstances where they have to rely on each other and where they are bound to bond, what is going to happen? Right, and it is based on the observation, the real-life observation, that most of the time what is going to happen is that two of those people are going to be closer together than the third one, right? And so rather than having, let's say, an equilateral triangle, two people will be close together and one of them will be somewhat of an outsider. Maybe closer, maybe farther apart, but something like that. And it sucks to be the outsider, and maybe it also sucks to be one of these other two people, because there's always this nagging feeling of guilt, right? That you're not really being towards this third person what you ought to be towards them. So this is the dynamic that this game wants to explore, that this game does explore, that every choice in this game is built around, right? The only choice you ever have in We Know the Devil is the choice of whom to exclude in this three-person relationship, or whom to bond in this three-person relationship. Right? You're always just putting two people together and leaving one of them out. And so, of course, what the game wants to explore is what happens in those situations. How do people react to that? And it's going to dramatize it using this notion of the devil who's going to appear and who's going to take over one of these characters, the character that has been excluded most. And so obviously, sort of mathematically, we're going to need three possible endings, right? We're going to need an ending where Venus was excluded, an ending where Neptune was excluded, and an ending where Jupiter was excluded. And so we need multiple endings because of the way that we've set up the theme and that we've set up the choice structure, and we couldn't really do without it. It makes sense, right? You almost have to do it this way if you're thinking about your choice structure in the particular way that We Know the Devil is structured. And in fact, what We Know the Devil wants to do in addition is it wants to explore the possibility of breaking out of this dynamic, right? Of creating a better, a more loving, a more fulfilling dynamic. It wants to look at the possibility of harmony, freedom, atonement, universality, you name it, something like that. So it also wants to have in itself the possibility that nobody gets excluded, that these three people really stick together as a team in which everyone is appreciated for who they are, and gets to play the role that they can play without having to play second fiddle or third fiddle to the other characters. So that's why there's a fourth ending. Right, a fourth ending in which the three of them stick together. And that's why We Know the Devil has these four endings. And because they are so thematically important, it's not really optional whether you are going to explore them or not. Right? If you want to understand the theme, if you want to understand what the game is telling you, then you have to explore all of these endings. Or I would say at the very least you have to explore, let's say, two of the two-person endings and this final three-person ending. Probably you're going to explore all of them. So there are thematic reasons to have four different endings, and for those same thematic reasons, it's almost obligatory for the player to explore all of these endings. But exploring these endings requires you to basically reread the entire story again. Make a few changes that differ, but mostly there are just two options, and well, you end up reading the same text again and again and again, and sometimes again, right? I mean, lots of text that you're going to see up to 4 times or 3 times or something like that, while you are sort of mechanically in your second and third and definitely fourth playthrough, sort of mechanically choosing the options that will get you to the endings that you haven't seen yet. And this is terrible, right? It totally takes you out of the fiction, right? You really do not want to read all of this text again. Now, the game has given you a nice little fast forward button which you can press, and so you do press it, but okay, now I'm just fast forwarding to the choice point, checking out whether there's some new content there or whether I should fast forward some more in order to get to these other endings. And it takes you out of the I mean, there's no immersion, right? You're taking out of the fiction. It transforms the game from what it was on the original first playthrough, and very immersive, atmospheric story, into this almost mechanical challenge where sort of you have to be a completionist in order to find out about the theme. And it doesn't feel good, it doesn't play well. The structure sort of defeats the kind of interaction that you want the player to have with the game. I don't really see how to solve this, by the way. I don't think it's, oh, they made a small mistake and if they had done it this way or that way, things would have been good. It's sort of inherent in the very setup of the game. And I think mostly the lesson that I would like to draw from it is that you have to be really, really careful when you are thinking in terms of multiple endings and in terms of people having to replay a game. You have to think really hard about whether that works, what is the price that the player has to pay, and so on and so forth. Alright, so that's, if you wish, the critical thing I want to take from We Know the Devil, right? I don't think that the choice structure and this multiple ending structure works all that well in terms of giving the player a good reading experience. That would then be a weakness of what is otherwise, I think, a very strong and interesting game. When we get to the actual, well, the writing is fantastic. I think the atmosphere created by the music and the pictures, it all meshes very well. It works really well together. I mean, this is not a team where one person made the art and one person made the writing and one person made the music and they never talked to each other and they were on different pages. No, I mean, it's really a great coherent set of assets there. And it does some really interesting things with the thematic development of the ideas that it's playing with. So let's focus on that, right? So we have these 3 queer teenagers in this, horrible summer camp, and man, this image of the camp leader is an image that will haunt my nightmares for years to come, I'm afraid. His sort of faceless, I mean, he has a face, but he's still kind of faceless, right? He's not real. They're not real. None of them is real. Nobody is real, right? I mean, the 3 teenagers themselves aren't really real. I mean, they're real, but they're afraid to show their realness, right? They're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of who they are. One of them is transgender. 2 of them, have feel same-sex attraction. There's probably other things wrong with them in terms of the moral code that they've been brought up in and that is being reinforced in this summer camp that they're part of. All of them think that they're wrong, right? And all of them have developed a very powerful coping mechanism to keep themselves alive given this fact and in these circumstances. So there's Venus, who is sort of totally apologetic, right? Who's totally, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I didn't mean to do this wrong, trying to make herself as inoffensive as possible. But of course, I mean, that's not really who she is, right? And there's lots of restrained anger beneath that, right? For not being able to be who she really is and having to sort of repress everything about herself in order to be as harmless as possible. So that's Venus. Then there's Jupiter. Jupiter is sort of... Jupiter hides behind competence. I mean, she's the good girl. Nobody really knows why she's there. Everybody likes her. She's kind of good at everything. And people look up to her because of that. But that's not how she really feels, right? I mean, she doesn't feel understood. What she needs, what she wants is intimacy. She's not getting intimacy, right? She's getting people seeing this persona that she's been carefully creating and that she doesn't dare take off, because making sure she belongs and behaves as well as possible is her coping mechanism, her defense against anything that might hurt her. And then finally there's Poseidon, who is putting on this act of not giving a fuck, right? Of, talking back, just looking on her phone all the time, that kind of stuff. But who is, I would say, mortally afraid of being, in fact, not good enough, right? I mean, she claims that she doesn't give a fuck, but she wants to be good, acceptable, right? She doesn't want to be the odd one out. She doesn't want to be the one who can never belong. And when she is possessed by the devil, she's going to try to turn the other children into people who also are evil, don't belong, are equally mean as she is. She is basically being hurt by having to put on this nasty, mean persona that doesn't really reflect who she is. So all of them are afraid of themselves. All of them are afraid of how they will be judged by their environment. They all have their own way of coping with this, but none of these coping mechanisms really work. There's something that all of them repress. There's something that all of them would yearn to show, right? They want to show who they really are. That's their most basic longing, their most basic yearning, and that yearning is the devil. Of course, it's the devil within this fictional context, right? I mean, if you're told that who you really are is evil, then the yearning to be who you really are, the yearning to show that to people, the yearning to be accepted for who you are, is the devil. So the devil is that yearning. And when the devil manages to possess an isolated character, like somebody who doesn't believe that they will be accepted by the others, who doesn't believe that this yearning is okay, then the devil is ugly. The devil is dangerous. Or maybe the devil is just misguided and confused, but there's something wrong with it, right? It threatens to destabilize society. It threatens to destabilize all the existing relationships, and it has to be defeated, right? The other two characters have to team up and defeat the devil, and whoever was possessed by the devil is left severely deflated and in need of recovery. So that's not good, right? I mean, at least one of these endings doesn't read too negative, but I think, all of them together sort of clearly present this idea that what's going on there is not good, right? At least one person is being sacrificed. I think that's the way that the game presents itself to the viewer, right? It tells you in its sort of about text, or in the advertisements, it tells you that, look, you have to sacrifice one person in order to save the other two. Sacrifice here meaning that they sort of show their real self, but it in a way that is unacceptable and that has to be rejected. And so they end up rejected and dejected and, terrible. But there's another way, right, within the game. If you manage to really balance the three characters, if they can create a friendship without exclusion, a friendship in which all of them can perform their role, be who they are, be accepted for who they are, become who they must become. Maybe that's an even better way to say it, because there's transformation involved. Not just recognition, but transformation. Then the devil turns out to be something else, right? The devil turns out to be liberation. It turns out to be acknowledgement. It turns out to be freedom. It turns out to be love. The devil is love. Love is the theme of this game. And especially if you get to this like better ending, the devil is not. Love is not just the theme of this game. I would say that the universality of love is the theme of this game. Right. So, of course, the game immediately asks at every point it asks this question of love or friendship. But I'm using love in a very very like broad way here, right? Not just erotic love, but love in general. Who are the two whose bond we will strengthen, and who is the one who falls out? And so we have this tension between love and exclusion. And of course, all of us have been sort of trained to think about love in terms of exclusion. If you love one person, then you don't love this other person. Right? I mean, this is what so many books and shows and like everything is based on. And I don't just mean like traditional marriage versus polyamory, although that would be one, maybe specific version of that. But quite in general, it's the very notion of jealousy, the very notion that the more you love one person, the less love you might have to give to someone else. That is something that I think informs a lot of ways that people think, and a lot of ways that love and friendship and so on are sometimes represented in different kinds of media. Of course, not always, right? And we know the devil is definitely trying to push it in the other direction. And it's trying to show you that if you can balance this love between three people, you achieve something that's more worthy, that's more powerful than if there's two people and one person gets excluded. So that's the basic premise. That's how the basic mechanism of the game works, right? I mean, if you want to get the best ending, you must ensure that your love encompasses three people and not just two people. And I think that the developers of the game knew perfectly well that there's something arbitrary about these numbers, right? I mean, why would 2 be a problem and 3 suddenly be good, given that there are 7 billion people on this earth, or however many people there might be on this earth? What's so special about 3? And of course the answer to that is that there's nothing special about 3, right? If we are going to make a point about love, and about the fact that love in the end is not exclusionary, then we have to make the point that love is universal. And in this best ending, we know the devil nails that perfectly. Right? We do not have the ending that you might expect, where these 3 teenagers bond together and somehow they maybe escape this evil summer camp, or they, whatever, are killed by this evil summer camp, or they defeat the evil summer camp, or something like that. No. These 3 teenagers, who are now described as, I think, the 3 worst girls since Eve, they have an apple that will seduce the world. Right? The entire summer camp comes after them. And what happens is, they turn them. They transform them. They show them the universality of love and freedom. And it is clearly hinted that this is going to be a process that is going to involve the entire world. Right? Somehow, the gates of love have opened, and it's going to be a transformation of everyone, everywhere. Right? So 3 is not the magic number. Infinity is the magic number. Universality is the magic word. The acceptance of queerness, which is the main sort of plot point here, right? These teenagers have to accept themselves and each other for who they are, even though that doesn't fit the preconceived notions of their society. this acceptance of queerness turns out to be the key that opens the gate to universal love, to a universal healing. I think that's a very powerful message. I think it's so. It reminds me of some of the discussions or some of the ways of thinking about feminism that you see. Right, one way of thinking about feminism is that it's a struggle of women against men, in a sense. Right, men have always been on top. They're the ones who have everything that you would like to have, and women don't have that, and so women have to take this away from men, and of course men are going to resist because they will lose something in the process. That's a terrible way of thinking about it. And something that people sometimes say is they say, oh look, no, it's not just women who suffer from gender discrimination, right? It's not just women who suffer under patriarchy. Also men who don't really identify with these standard masculine traits suffer under patriarchy. And that's true, but that's not going far enough, right? I mean, even men who do identify with masculine characteristics suffer under patriarchy. Right? To believe that in a situation of to believe that in a situation of oppression, the oppressor is happy, is to submit to the logic of oppression. In a situation of oppression, nobody is happy. Right? There can be no love unless love is universal, no freedom unless freedom is universal, no happiness unless happiness is universal. Anything that poisons the relationships between human beings poisons everyone. Right? That is a basic truth, I would say, and it seems to be a basic truth that we know the devil is exploring here in this ending by saying, no, I mean, this acceptance of queerness is going to be a liberation, not just for like these three queer teenagers and not just for all the other queers in the world. It is necessarily a liberation for everyone. And given the nature and genre of the work, it blows up into a metaphysical, a great and beautiful metaphysical, sort of happening that transforms everyone and everything. So, queerness, one could say, in the way that that the story of this work goes, queerness, well, accepting queerness forces us to break down all these dichotomies, all these structures that have imprisoned our thinking. And by doing so, it creates the space for freedom. It creates the space for diversity. It creates the space where everyone can flower into something that they couldn't flower in before. Right? So in this way, the acceptance of queerness becomes a liberation of the world. It is the gateway towards a new world that wasn't possible beforehand. And in that sense, I think We Know the Devil is sort of the opposite of Anna Anthropy's also brilliant game, Queers in Love at the End of the World. Right? Queers in Love at the End of the World it's a game that hurts. It's a game that hurts because here we have these two queers who are in love at the end of a world that is not their world. Right? It's a world that has always hurt them. And it's ending. And they don't care. Right? I mean, who cares about a world that has never accepted you? They care about each other, but they don't care about this world. I mean, it has excluded them, and they exclude it. And in a sense, that's why it ends, maybe, right? I mean, that's why it makes sense to fictionally have the world end there. And We Know the Devil sort of takes the optimistic counter-conclusion and tells us that, well, if queerness is accepted, then that must mean that the world begins. Right? Whenever love really happens, that is when the world begins. So, let's get back to a moment for the religious imagery here. Right? The devil turns out, in the end of We Know the Devil, to be that which opens up a space of infinite and infinitely varied love. Infinite and infinitely varied love. And of course, that means that the devil turns out to be God. Right? God was never that voice on the radio who was just mumbling something that had no meaning to you and setting down some commandments that seemed restrictive but irrelevant. God was the devil. The devil was God. The devil and God together are this infinite freedom, this infinite love, this infinite variety that none of us could possibly understand. So personally, and I'm moving a little bit away from the game here, but I think it might be relevant, and it's something I'd like to get maybe off my chest anyway. There's nothing that makes less sense to me than people who say, oh, because of my religion, I am here fighting against same-sex marriage. God doesn't want same-sex marriage. And I'm like, we're talking about God. I mean, do you realize what God even is? God is not your neighbor. God is not somebody who is bound by the contingent historical ideas of this nation or this age or that time or even this planet or species or whatever. God is something that transcends every category of thought. God is the source of an infinite variety of options that we can't even think of. How on earth could God be interested in something as irrelevant as a person's biological shape? I mean, it's such a total mismatch. Like, on the one hand, a clearly local, contingent custom. And on the other hand, something that infinitely transcends every possible category of thought. And you're saying, oh yeah, I'm putting them together. And I'm claiming that the infinitely transcendent thing that I can't even speak about or say anything truthful about because clearly human language is incapable of capturing it, that doesn't want gay people to marry. Come on. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, it's not even religion. I mean, it's not even religion. God. Okay, here's what I want to say about that. Most religious people would be willing to say that God is love, I guess. But clearly, if you think about it for a single moment, God is also the quintessence of queerness. God is beyond every dichotomy. God is always not what you think he might be. Alright, that's just something I wanted to say about that. The game itself doesn't really talk about that very much. I mean, God kind of disappears in the ending. It's the devil who has transformed us. It's the devil who has opened us up to love and freedom. But I think sort of implicit there is that this devil is the only God who could be worth worshipping. And it's not the God of the radio. So that's what I wanted to say about We Know the Devil. Again, I think it's a very interesting piece, both for the ways in which it maybe doesn't work as well, and even more for the ways in which it does work. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope my camera bouncing around when I'm thumping my table isn't too annoying. And I hope to see you again later in a new analysis of a new piece of interactive fiction. Thank you.